Thank you for tuning in to Missoula Community Access Television. This is a 30-minute discussion of evolution versus creation. Hello, I'm Rod Harcel, your commentator, and we have two guests today speaking on this subject. We have from the University of Montana, representing the evolution side, Professor George D. Stanley, Jr., who has been teaching at the university for 9 years now in the geology department. Also on the creation side, we have with us today Mr. Dennis Wilson, who has a BA from the U of M in the zoology department. He has been teaching science in high school level and made a personal investigation into the creation-evolution debate for the past 20 years. The way our program is going to work today is we have a series of questions. Both Mr. Wilson and Professor Stanley will be discussing their side of the evolution-creation topic today. We'll start off with our first question. And Professor Stanley, can you tell us what do you mean, or can you define the term evolution?
Yes. I think when you define evolution, you have to qualify it because what we really mean is organic evolution. And that's the idea, I guess originally well represented by Darwin, of descent with modification. That is, organisms through a long period of their existence have changed and have evolved from common ancestors.
Okay. The same question, what do you mean when you use the term creation, Mr. Wilson?
When we speak of creation, creationists mean that by fiat, a being we define as God has in fact began all life, the cosmos, and all things that we see both in nature and we experience in life. We believe that evolution is a contrary scenario which begins all things from a naturalistic perspective. This is the reason that creationists disagree with the term evolution.
Our second question today is, what is your opinion and the best evidence for creation, Mr. Wilson?
Well, the best evidence for creation is found in the fossil record. As Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University and Niles Eldredge of the American Museum of Natural History have stated very eloquently, the fossil record is filled with gaps, places in the record that do not demonstrate transitions from one form of life to another, but rather the standard throughout the record, from the smallest organism to the most complex, is a statement of quick change. New things appear suddenly in the fossil record. This, in our estimation, is the best evidence for creation, and also the very evidence that Darwin demanded when he wrote Origin of the Species. He said that my theory will either be proven or disproven on the basis of the fossil record.
For the remaining questions, we're going to offer the opposing side of this topic, evolution versus creation, a rebuttal or a second opinion to that. Professor, what do you think of the answer of Mr. Wilson's to that question? Which was, what in your opinion is the best evidence for creation?
Yes, well, I would also, because perhaps it is my own personal preference, that I study fossils in paleontology, I would also venture that fossils offer the best evidence for evolution. And I resent Mr. Dennis's implications about the paleontologist, a very respected paleontologist, Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould, using such evidence as the fossils to show that evolution does not work. It's quite to the contrary. The evidence that Eldredge and Gould have presented has really modified our ideas about evolution and presented an idea that species don't necessarily go through slow, gradual, steady change, but instead they go through sudden changes, punctuational changes, that is, sudden burst of evolution that can go quite unrecorded in the fossil record. So Darwin, in a way, was right. He said that the validity of his theory would, of course, rest on the presence of fossils that would document these transitions. And Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould present their evidence for this kind of change in the fossil record. And they, because of the rapidity of evolution, isolated populations separated from the parent population evolve in rapidity far, far beyond our abilities to resolve them in the fossil record. This totally squares with the fossil record and in a way vindicates Darwin.
You might have answered your answer to the question, what is your opinion is the best evidence for evolution? What is the very best answer or evidence for the proving of evolution?
Well, there's so much evidence, really. But I say, as a paleontologist, I would present the evidence as the fossil record, which spans an incredible amount of time, from 3.5 billion years to the present. And our sequence of rocks that record the various kinds of fossils are a very good testimony to this organic change that we speak about when we say the word evolution, organic evolution.
It sounds like you're both claiming that fossils are somewhat of a proof for the pro stand of evolution or the pro stand of creation. Is that correct, Mr. Wilson?
It is indeed. What Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge have said is that what we see in the fossils is evidence that there have been many different organisms over a long period of time in their estimation. But what we don't see in those fossils is a transitional form that is an amphibian becoming a reptile. We don't see a fish becoming an amphibian. We see just completed organisms in the fossil record. Now, what that means is that he's arguing from the paucity of evidence rather than from the existence of evidence. There was a time that the Greeks had the same idea. They would see the sun and the stars moving in opposite directions of what was expected, and they began to argue that the heavenly bodies were moving in what they called epicycles, in the wrong direction. And after a while, the whole system broke down. Well, this is what's happening with punctuated equilibrianism, which is what Professor Stanley is talking about. That what they're saying is that they see no evidence for evolution, and they're saying that just the fact that no evidence exists is an argument for punctuated equilibrianism, which is explaining around the evidence.
If you just joined us here at Mozilla Community Access Television, we are having a 30-minute discussion of evolution versus creationism. And we have our two guests with us, Professor George Stanley and also Dennis Wilson, who also has taught high school here at Montana. We're going to our third question today, and it is addressed to Professor Stanley. How old, in your opinion, is the planet Earth, and what evidence backs up your opinion, and why is the age of the Earth important to the discussion of evolution versus creation?
Well, the age of the Earth, as far as we geologists are able to ascertain, goes back beyond 3.8 billion years ago. And there is some speculation that the Earth could have arisen as far back as 5 billion years. And the evidence for the age of the Earth, and I think this is very important to the discussion of evolution, primarily because the fossils themselves are the basis for organic change and so forth, and their record back to almost to the very earliest part of Earth, that is the oldest fossils, about 3.5 billion years old, show us some evidence for this evolutionary change that we're speaking about when we say organic evolution. And the age of the Earth can be established by many, many different ways, but radiometric dating, of course, is the method that most geologists use, and this is the really deals with the laws of physics and chemistry and the breakdown of stable isotopes to their daughter products. These are the movements of the electrons within the atomic structures that we know about. And we hear about the cesium clock, which is extremely important. And for many things in science, we need extremely close timekeepers. If we're off a microsecond, we could be wrong. A good example was the Mariner mission, which went to Mars. And it's quite incredible if you think about it. They're using a cesium clock, utilizing the same principles that geologists use for the breakdown, half-life, and the dating of the rocks of Earth. And they were off only, I think, about 60 miles after a journey of about 15 million miles to Mars. And that's incredible accuracy. And it's that kind of accuracy that is used to date the rocks. But also evidence could come equally well from astrophysics, from astronomy. We're seeing light emanating from stars that went supernova billions of years ago, let alone millions of years ago. There's quite a bit of evidence of the antiquity of the Earth.
Mr. Wilson, your answer to how old is, in your opinion, is the planet Earth, and what evidence backs up your opinion, and why is the age of the Earth important to the discussion of creationism?
Well, as the professor said, this is a very important discussion area, because if in fact the Earth is very young, then evolution, as improbable as it is, has absolutely zero probability of having happened. However, some of the things he mentioned have two sides to them. For example, the radioactive isotopes that we find in the planet's crust produce alpha particles. Alpha radiation is a particular type of particle that when it picks up electrons in the atmosphere becomes helium. Helium in our atmosphere is found in very, very small quantities. Small enough quantities that they could have only built up to this level within a period of between 1,700 years and 170,000 years. Every time a piece of uranium changes to lead, it releases some of these alpha particles into the atmosphere. The atmosphere is still so depleted of helium that we can say that this atmosphere only existed for a few thousand years. Helium is also an inert element, which means that it does not recombine with anything else in the Earth. So therefore, it should be here from the very beginning. There are other things from astrophysics that maybe I'll have a chance to explain in a few minutes.
Okay, our next question is addressed to you, Mr. Wilson. Explain your opinion of thermodynamics and what role it plays, if any, in the topic of evolution versus creation.
All right, I'd like to cover that for just a moment, but if I could I go to my astrophysics?
Sure.
The short period comets that orbit the sun, every time they go around the sun, release tremendous amounts of gases into space. That is, in fact, the tail of the comet, such as Halley's. Every time they go around, they diminish. They couldn't possibly exist for billions of years, as my opponent here says. They could only exist for periods of thousands of years. Therefore, our solar system can only be thousands of years old. As far as thermodynamics, there is a time zero in the universe that tells us that all things are going downhill towards ruin. This can be elucidated statistically, it can be elucidated mathematically, but all things tend downhill. Even in an open system, which is what he will mention, in an open system, energy entering must be the right kind of energy. If I send my son, who is 1, into my china closet, I add tremendous energy to my china closet, but it doesn't add to order in the china closet. It adds to disorder. It has to be the correct type of energy, and the correct type of energy is not raw sunlight to produce life on this planet.
Professor Stanley, your rebuttal or response to Mr. Wilson's statement.
Well, I think that the second law of thermodynamics is probably the most misunderstood and misused in this context of supporting creationism, because of course, we know that things just don't run uphill by themselves, and we know that when a glass is broken, it shatters, and we never see the parts coming back and reassembling themselves. If it did, we would really have some concern. But when we think about the second law of thermodynamics as applied to biological organisms, we have to really reorient ourselves, because we're dealing with not a physical phenomenon, but a special and unique kind of biological property in the cell, for example, where energy can accumulate. But one of the problems, I think, is that I think that the creationists neglect in many of these debates is that this old problem of the thermodynamics issue was settled long, long ago in scientific circles which did debate this kind of thing. But I think that we need to consider the organisms themselves and the kinds of properties an organism has as regards an inanimate object.
So one final answer on this, does thermodynamics play any role in the proving of evolution or disproving?
Well, I think it's, are you addressing me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think that thermodynamics has its place in physics and chemistry and in many areas, but I think my contention is that it's misapplied in this particular context.
At this time, Mr. Wilson, you have an opportunity to respond to Professor Stanley's comments.
Well, all things obey ultimately the laws of physics and chemistry, even living systems. And while it is true that living systems can, through a photosynthetic mechanism, take energy from the sun and organize that energy into sugars and other sorts of molecules, it is not true that without the proper means of using that energy that the cell can do anything with it. For example, if I take and swallow gasoline, which is perfectly a good source of energy for my car, I will destroy myself. The second law will have its way with me. If I add food to my car, it will do the same to the car. You have to have the proper energy and the proper program to use the energy that is incoming into a system. Otherwise, it goes downhill and therefore has no way to go uphill, as the evolutionists would say.
Okay, it's now time during this debate of evolution versus creation to have some final comments. We'll first go with Professor George D. Stanley.
Well, I think that evolution is a fact, and many people I hear saying evolution is a theory. Well, perhaps they don't quite understand what theories are in science, but all scientists that I know who are consider themselves valid scientists accept evolution as a fact. The theory is what is the driving mechanism behind it. Charles Darwin had a mechanism for that. Natural selection was his mechanism. That is still being debated at present among scientists. But the fact of evolution is confirmed every single time an oil well is drilled, and fossils form the basis of dating the rocks.
Our final comment now from Dennis Wilson.
When Darwin wrote in his private diaries, one of the things he said was, sometimes I feel I'm chasing a fantasism. That's the way he put it. He felt that it was a fantasy that he was dealing with for many reasons. One of the things that really shocked him was the order that went into the eye, not just the human eye, but the eye of insects, the eye of the trilobite, which is supposed to be one of the most ancient organisms in history. The eye of the trilobite is such an adept eye that it can actually readjust for water. It's an incredible thing. But Darwin saw that there was tremendous order in that, and where there is tremendous order, there's an order maker. Wherever you find a clock, there's a clock maker. And random chance does not produce clocks. It produces garbage, as in the second law. Therefore, we who are creationists believe that the complete argument of the entire universe speaks for a watchmaker, a clockmaker.
You've been listening to Dennis Wilson and Professor Stanley from here in Missoula, Montana on Missoula Community Access Television. We've had some interesting analogies on proving their point for evolution versus creationism. I'm certain there's more to be discussed on this topic, and we hope to do that soon again here on MCAT. We'd like to thank our guests today, Professor George D. Stanley, Jr. and Dennis Wilson. Thank you for being with us today. We hope you'll come back again and discuss this topic in the future.
Please do that.
I'm Rod Harsell, your commentator, and this has been an MCAT production.